January is always a bit of a mess for me, but this time more than usual. After I gave myself a week-long break after MagFest to recover from the conflu that never came, my initial plan was to review a game that ended up being demoted down to a browser-based after certain things came to light. The game I'm about to review was planned as a side quest until a closed beta ended only a couple weeks after starting and placing it in open beta, and henceforth, reviewable status. It's not like I didn't put anything up, but as far as official episodes go, sorry I'm late. Since it's pretty obvious I didn't have any personal history with that intro, and you're probably wondering what all that anime-looking footage had to do with anything, I figure we'll just start this off. This is the MMO Grinder, and it's time to look at Aura Kingdom. Developed by X-Legend and published in the US by Area Games, Aura Kingdom, known in China as Fantasy Frontier Online, is the second X-Legend title published by Area, the other being my favorite of that year MMO, Eden Eternal. Aura Kingdom entered closed beta on December 23rd of 2013, remaining so for only about 2 weeks before becoming publicly available on January 6th of 2014, because I'm pretty sure Area doesn't understand what closed beta means. Aura Kingdom's story is a bit more complex than you'd think, involving your character coming in contact with an Eidolon, a summoned creature that is known for causing great power in people who possess them, but just as easily corrupting them and transforming them into evil creatures. The story is surprisingly dark if you pay close attention to it. There's stories of prejudice, fear, betrayal, and corruption that you might just gloss over if you scam the skip button and dismiss the entire game as a Doki Doki Kawaii Funtime Desu. I highly advise you pay attention, especially if you're a fan of a lot of the PS2-era JRPGs. Let's get in here and take a look. This game goes for a very slick cel-shaded style, reminiscent of the current era of Tales of RPG series. It uses far more realistically proportioned characters than Eden Eternal, and the lack of mouse, frog, and bear player races make this not as kid-friendly as Eden Eternal is. I can't help but feel like this is what Ragnarok Online 2 wishes it had looked like. Of course, to the dismissive eye, the first and probably only thing you're going to notice is one solid theme running throughout the graphics. Super kawaii! This, of course, has its detractors, especially those who hate the anime aesthetic, and the crap ton of anime-related dances like the Hari Hari Yukai isn't going to get you on board any faster. But, as I mentioned before, this game has some seriously dark tones in the story that you'll end up missing if you don't read it. If anything, I think this game works better for an adult or teenage anime fan audience, but those looking for a cuter aesthetic might just fare better with Eden Eternal. What's always impressed me about X-Legend is the sheer amount of quality in their presentation for a Chinese developer. As I mentioned in my reviews of Hunter Blade and Age of Wushu, most Chinese MMOs have a very distinct haphazard quality to them, but not so with X-Legend. It seems to be the norm for X-Legend, but Aura Kingdom's aesthetic is very polished and pleasing, with rarely a low-res texture or disjointed font choice. There's no copy-pasted mechanics, stolen graphics, or ridiculously complex formulas. I mean, this isn't going to be like Age of Wushu, where you're just going around kidnapping people and stuffing them into sacks. Well, it's not like you're going to have to tend to instantly growing crops and spray them for bugs. It's not Wushu. Trust me. There's fantastic work in this game's soundtrack. It's a well-orchestrated soundtrack that definitely fits the fantasy theme. Of course, having the fantasy theme means the game's soundtrack doesn't exactly step out of that box, but there are plenty of fantastic tracks to listen to here, especially a choir-back track in an early dungeon, and a very creepy, low-key, atmospheric set of repeated tones during a special story mission. As is the norm with a lot of world MMOs, the music plays for a while and stops, but it seems oddly more chaotic. Sometimes I'll hear the loops go on for a long while, other times the music will kick in with a battle theme when not in combat. Other times it will remain silent, or just not change at all. Even though music remains on a very short loop, it's oddly not repetitive like Ragnarok Online 2's soundtrack got, but it remains interesting enough to get your attention, but stays far enough in the background, never really demanding your attention. Sounds remain typical of the genre, related mostly to the spell effects and monster noises. It's still good, but doesn't come across as stock in any particularly noticeable ways, and enemies tend to sound like you'd expect them to. The game also features a bit of voice work, but that remains mostly to the cutscenes, with no real representation in the game, His conversations with NPCs play as two portraits in a text block, also very reminiscent of the JRPG genre. The cutscenes are also why I pronounce the chosen term for the summons as Eidolons and not Eidolons, despite that being the proper pronunciation of that word. People seem pretty apprehensive about Area's current ways of installation, with an all-encompassing launcher similar to the NC Software OG Planet launcher, simply called Area Ignite. I wouldn't mind it as much myself if the login for Ignite acted as a catch-all for every game in the program, but you still have to sign in separately. After the game is installed, you still need to set up a security pin in the game before you can start playing. After that, you'll get to the character creator, which is mostly contained to face options. You can choose male or female of nothing but human characters and their hairstyle and color, face, eye color, and that's roughly it. The game contains a fairly large amount of classes, starting with the Sword and Board Guardian, the Axe-wielding Ravager, and the Twin Sword Duelist for the melee classes. Unlike most fantasy MMOs, this game forgoes archers for the pistol-toting gunslingers and cannon-wielding grenadiers. And before someone says it, yes, there is an archer class along with one more melee class in the Taiwanese and Hong Kong versions of the game, but there's no ETA on those classes for the US release. Magic fans have their choice of playing as a bard, better play a healing or support role, a wizard for elemental magic, or a sorcerer for dark magic and debuff focuses. After choosing a class, you can choose from 1 or 4 starting Eidolons: the electric and defense-focused Seraph, the healing magical girl Marilee, the baby dragon Grim for ranged fire damage, and the melee damage-focused unicorn Alessa. Yes, if you've ever wanted to play an armor-bedecked axe knight who rends their foes into pieces assisted by their blade horn-wielding pink unicorn, you have found your game. Other Eidolons will unlock as you play the game, and through several methods, but you'll always choose between these 4 when building your first character. You won't even see the Eidolon right away until you've progressed a bit into the story. The game starts you out with a tutorial instance that places you in the middle of a huge fight before being defeated by a Shadow Knight and waking up in a town. It's unsure whether or not this was a flashback, a dream sequence, or a vision of the future, but the story pretty much starts in this town, which feels more like the actual tutorial. Use WASD to move, or click anywhere in the field to move there. Pressing a hotkey will use a skill, and you'll quickly notice that there is no mana pool in this game. You can use any skill at any time as long as it's not on cooldown. Press space to jump and double jump. Keep an eye out when fighting enemies, as they'll telegraph more powerful moves by leaving a red field on the ground in a similar combat mechanic to Guild Wars 2 or The Secret World. While the initial tutorial is pretty much a controls course showcasing the combat system of the game, it's the next area that teaches you the more complex mechanics, including granting you your mount early on, the basic flow of the quest system and achievement quests, and some early instant story dungeons and events. You'll get your mount around level 8 after a certain quest, but you won't feel like you'll need it for long, as you'll get your first sign of your Eidolon around the same set of quests, appearing next to you as a blue orb and allowing you to glide in the air for long distances and at high speeds by double tapping forward or pressing R while in midair. The mount isn't completely useless, however. Since the quest system uses autopathing, you'll automatically mount up as you move to the spot through this system. You'll also find that a system of elements where you'll have certain enemies, or even armor pieces that you can wear, will have different elemental properties that can be exploited to cause extra damage to enemies or other players with certain skills. The first area's story takes you through discovering your Eidolon powers and vowing to remove them from yourself, as you find out that those wielding these same powers are known to mutate into horrible murderous creatures, and the town you just saved nearly turns on you for having these powers, forcing you to volunteer to leave for fear that you may become the very thing that you're trying to stop.
Super kawaii!
To make the combat far easier than it already is, there's an auto potion section that you can turn on or off, and you can adjust what potions will be consumed, as well as what health percentage you want to have them activated on. Upon nearly each level, you'll gain a point to place into your stats, with a separate section for attack and defense stats. Attack stats are damage, crit, and speed, damage being self-explanatory, crit boosting the chance you do critical hits and the amount of damage you do when performing them, and speed reducing skill cast times and cooldowns. Defense stats are health for increased HP, defense for lessening damage, and evade for a chance to avoid damage altogether. These stats affect your abilities whether you're physical or magical based, and can be found on most equipment pieces as well. A secondary stat upgrade system is known as the Envoy's Path, where you start at the center of a grid based on your current class and unlock parts of the grid to lead into finding and unlocking more upgrades and skills, like boosting the damage of your skills, specific skill sets, or even unlocking some of the game's combo skills, which aren't available until level 40, where you'll upgrade into getting your secondary class. More on that later. Finally, you'll unlock Masteries, which are swappable skill augments that you can switch out when you wish, some adding special features to your skills and changing their names, or giving you a simple stat boost. You're limited to them early on, but will gain a lot more with later levels. Quests in this game, especially with the autopathing system, are pretty simple and straightforward. However, you might come across some random items or NPCs that have green exclamation points above them. These often grant you an item with a short explanation of what it is and how to use it. These are the achievement quests, which, unlike the story quests, don't use the autopathing system or mark their position on the map. You'll actually have to pay attention to what is being said, what the item reads, and where to go if you want to complete them. You know, like a regular quest in any other MMO before Warcraft made itself and other games want to be a paint-by-numbers. Yeah, I said it. Achievement quests aren't simply for achievements, as completing them also will grant you titles, which offer stat boosts and unlock cumulatively. Once you unlock a title, you get that stat boost added to your total. What's nice is that once you unlock an achievement or title, it's unlocked across your entire account. You don't have to have your alternate characters go through the same quest again. They'll even have the stat boost unless that specific title was level locked. Some story quests go above the simple kill and collection quests, like instanced areas where you'll take over control of an NPC and stealth your way through sections of the map. There's even bonuses for listening to certain NPC conversations, rewarding a secondary cash op currency called loyalty. Just look for any NPC with a gold word balloon over them and wait around near them until the conversation finishes and you'll get an achievement. If you don't for some reason, just run away from them a bit and come back to try again. The equipment system is pretty standard to the genre, save for the swapping of color-coded quality, with blue being the uncommon items and green being rare. You can augment equipment with secret stones that can be bought or found from enemies, which will slightly increase certain skills' effectiveness, as well as be upgraded themselves. They can be removed and slotted at secret stone NPCs for no cost or penalty. All equipment does not affect the way your character looks, but you'll unlock more costume pieces as you play for an alternate look. There's a simple crafting system involving the item fusion system, where you can craft buff foods and collect certain quest items, which is as simple as collecting those required items, and in the case of food items, a bit of a fee. Item fusion is the priciest thing in the game so far, but oddly there's little else to spend money on when starting out. Your bags will be filling up fairly quickly, as this is a game that loves dumping items on you, and the loot is almost always automatic. I say almost because occasionally the game will end up dropping a valuable chest on the field, and looting it will give you a good amount of equipment pieces. Since you usually have more equipment than you'll actually need, you can break up these items with salvage option and use the fragments gained to level up your equipment with a special item. Selling the items isn't as effective as you'd rarely get more than a few coins for it. There's also plenty of gray items as well that aren't worth selling either, and often will just clog up your inventory. Such as when you kill off the human pirates and find things like an old diary and a still beating heart. Once you hit level 25, you'll get a quest that will allow you a new Eidolon in the form of the busty Ice Valkyrie Sigrun, and around level 43, the ancient golem Gigas. An interesting but odd thing about this system is that the Eidolons are also account-linked, like the titles, but you can't have one active Eidolon on one character and then use them on another. If you try to use the summoning key for Sigrun when you have Sigrun equipped on an older character, the game will claim that Sigrun is busy and will not let you use her. So is the key worthless? No, since you can use it to upgrade Sigrun as long as the next evolution is on your main character. Just make sure to place the key into the shared section of your bank to pass it on. And here I said the game didn't have a ton of convoluted systems. Finally, as I mentioned, you'll get the ability to choose a secondary class at level 40, and these classes combine with your existing ones to offer up different combinations. Make sure to check what combo skills are offered by each choice, and you can definitely open up your personal playstyle throughout this system. Just don't be alarmed when a cutscene jumps in and claims that you chose a secondary class before you ever actually finished choosing one. When that cutscene finally ends, you should just be able to pick it up as normal. Just a bit of a heads up. To finish off this section, I have to remark that this game is really easy to solo. Almost ridiculously so, and you'll gain levels at an absurdly fast pace by just going through the story. I managed to hit level 40 on my first character with only about 2.5 days of play under my belt, and I was messing around with the achievements the entire time. Later levels do slow the pace a bit, but at no time does the game enter Eden Eternal's territory of asking for absurd amounts of kills for each quest, usually sticking around 15 kills for the level 50 range. Content kinda slows to a crawl around this level, and this is where the game's beta roots start showing a bit more. Hopefully we'll get a lot more content updates in the coming months, so take your time, enjoy the sights, and don't feel like you need to rush to the endgame levels. As you might expect, this game tends to attract the anime fans, but I didn't notice too much of the obnoxiousness that most people tend to expect from this fanbase. In fact, for the most part, people in this game seem really quiet. Granted, this might have something to do with the fact that I immediately shut off the trade and world channels, the former being a near non-stop scroll of trade offers and spamming, and the latter being a channel that's only usable by purchasing and using cash shop megaphones, which people use to make trade offers and spam. Region is the only other chat channel that actually allows a large group of people to talk, but it's usually pretty quiet, and if there is talking, the conversations tend to lean towards the helpful, which is always nice to see. Unfortunately, MMO etiquette seems all but dead in this game. Be it through douchiness or just plain ignorance, other players will often steal your kills, endlessly slaughter story-required enemies every time they spawn, steal the turn-in that drops from boss monsters after you've killed them, or even helping you by killing a monster that you might be in the middle of trying to capture for a quest. I said this game was easy. Half our guild got to level 30 without spending a single upgrade point. We don't need your help. We really don't. Luckily, the respawn rate for all enemies but the boss monsters is pretty fast, although that can get a bit annoying as well. Of course, you might be tempted to party up and get through all these quests even faster, right? Yeah, something about the party system in this game. If you don't partake in a kill, you don't get credit, even if your party members did. You can kill 5 enemies on your own, while you're right next to your partner, who've also killed off 5 enemies on their own, and if you didn't at least take a pot shot at each other's enemy as they were fighting it, you'll still only have 5 kills each. While this does seem to make the idea of being in a party kinda pointless, there's a major XP boost you get for playing in a full party, and best of all, you don't even need to be anywhere near each other for the XP bonus to take effect. So if you see a level 45 invites you to a party at level 10 and they're halfway across the world, there's still pretty much no reason not to, since free XP is still free XP. There's also XP and a lot of bonuses offered for those who join or start up a guild, which you can't join a guild until you reach level 10, and you can't form your own until you hit level 20. Joining a guild and completing certain tasks will grant you points that add to your guild's level. The higher level your guild, the more bonuses you unlock, including higher guild capacity, more guild ranks, higher XP bonuses, a customizable guild emblem, and more. Those interested in joining the guild we've created, it's Grindstone on the Chimera server. We're already level 3, and most of my community isn't bored with this game. Yet. There's a PvP system limited to Battlegrounds, which seems to be only open on certain days, and the tried and true world MMO standard of dueling. There's not much beyond that at this point, however there is talk of a guild war system, and perhaps this will just be fleshed out more in time. Heading into a major city will put a strain on your frame rate with the sheer amount of players, especially on a populated server like Chimera. If you find this a bit much, you can click on the Hide Other Players option on the minimap. Unfortunately, this works outside of cities as well, and might explain why so many people are stealing other people's kills, as you won't see anyone but yourself or your party members if you have this option on, so don't forget to shut it off while you're questing. Like Eden Eternal, which, trust me, I'm getting just as tired of saying as you are of hearing, the game is pretty easy on its own, but it becomes painfully difficult during instances. Those of you looking to challenge yourself by not spending upgrade points might change your mind the first time you enter a solo dungeon and find yourself struggling to stay alive. Turn that into the 5-man dungeon mode, and unless you're being escorted by someone much higher level than required for the place, prepare to struggle if you don't coordinate your attacks properly and have the right combination of tanks and healers. X-Legend seems to really enjoy making its dungeons difficult for as easy as the questing is. Also, similar to dungeons is Dimensional Gates, where you and 2 other players can team up to fight against a boss for rewards and guild points. These fights aren't as tough as the instances, but they do actually require 3 people with a quest to start, as summoning the boss actually cannot be done unless 3 players with a quest unlock the 3 crystals surrounding the portal. It helps to have friends in this game, but soloing is much more than doable. Those looking for a challenge might not feel the need to have friends in this game, but it definitely helps make the time move along, and it's just a fun game to have a group for. This cash shop, I don't know what to think. A lot of the systems in here irk me beyond simply wanting to ignore them, but at the same time, there's nothing that really screams, "You need this," as seems to be the norm with X-Legends titles. But there's a lot more reliance on stat-boosting armors and luck-based purchases this time around. This is also unfortunately present in the dye system, where you can only buy a bottle of dye and hope the game gives you the color you want. Be also wary that you cannot dye every costume in the game, especially those given to you by the story quests early on. However, the dye colors are reusable and unlocked on any costume that you can use them on. There are a few purchasable costumes as an alternative to the existing ones in the game. I would expect this to get a bit more of a selection as the months go on, but the sheer assortment of lucky boxes, which cost less than the costumes outright, but still leave you with a chance of getting some random item rather than the thing you actually bought it for, just kind of annoys me. I'm never really a fan of these. Speaking of not being a fan of things, there's armor pieces with stats on them, but there's 2 reasons that this doesn't bother me as much. First off, these act like the heirloom items from World of Warcraft. They're middle-of-the-road gear that levels as you level up. It's far more useful on a new alt than it will be for your main. Secondly, this game's soloing is very easy, and all this would do for you is give you a decent set of armor that you won't have to worry about upgrading until you reach the highest levels. Be wary of an early quest that has you go into the cash shop that, at the time of me writing this, has not been implemented into the game, where an NPC will ask you to fetch an item out of the cash shop, and said item doesn't exist yet. There's even a text scroll in the cash shop warning you of this, so if you want to save yourself the trouble, just don't pick this quest up until it's implemented. I'd also assume that a lot of the items intended for this shop haven't been fully implemented yet either. Inventory space does get choked, but the game does grant you 5-slot bags with a few of the quests. If that's not enough for you, you can buy more here or upgrade to the 10-slot bags. These bags are also usable in the banks. Finally, not all the cash shop purchases are available for cash purchases only, as the loyalty point system I mentioned earlier for completing certain achievements can also be spent for some useful items in here. It's not imperative that you look in here, but feel free to shop around if you've got a good amount of loyalty saved up. X-Legend is a solid developer, and Aura Kingdom, provided you like the aesthetic, is a great and well-polished title, despite not being much of a challenge for seasoned MMO players. If you're into anything that you saw or heard here, I more than encourage you to check it out, unless the aesthetic just bothers you that much. Here's my final rating. The simplistic playstyle of this game and lack of solo challenge cements this as another great world MMO for newcomers to the genre. There aren't as many systems to worry about, and mistakes can be undone fairly simply most of the time. There's no stats to choose that would be wholly worthless to your character, and most of your more complex mechanics are practically taken care of for you, while others don't affect your combat usefulness enough to make them required. For a free-to-play, hell, even for a paid title, this game would look amazing. There's tons of vibrant colors and a solid aesthetic to go around, with nothing looking out of place, and it's just a lot of fun to look at, with environments that vary in interesting ways, and heavy amounts of detail where you wouldn't expect it. It's an overall solid presentation, and another fantastic showing from X-Legend, and a strong contender for being a personal favorite of mine. This is the kind of game I thought Heviclonia was going to be, and the kind of game Ragnarok Online 2 should have been. I mentioned the cash shop is a bit on the frustrating side, but inventory slots are almost always a worthwhile purchase if you're having trouble keeping loot in check. The loyalty point system is a decent alternative to cash though, and some of the items in the loyalty shop are actually more interesting than their cash shop counterparts, and occasionally the only way to obtain them. If you hate the anime cel-shaded style, you've probably shut off the video by now or just never bothered starting it in the first place, but this still has to be noted. The entire game's aesthetic is covered in anime looks, designs, and references, so some might lose interest if that's something that bothers you. The gameplay is extremely simplistic for an MMO, with very few mechanics to keep track of, and a lot of the game practically plays itself. Without an interesting mechanic like Eden Eternal's all-class system, the game doesn't come across as groundbreaking in the least. It also seems that there's just a lot of content that's still on the way, and hitting high levels will have you scrounging around for things to do. Hopefully they churn these out in time, but otherwise you might want to wait a bit before you try to rush to endgame, even unintentionally. Next time, I could not possibly go further away from this genre.
I'm hovering over 1 in 3, 2, 1.
Super Kawaii!